Deputy Owen Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr McDonough and to Mr Daly and your colleagues for being here today, and thank you for your opening statement. What I'd like to look at, if I can, in my first series of questions, is at the general figures, given that 2013 is a milestone year for NAMA, and perhaps my colleagues will come in on some of the more detailed aspects of the 2012 report as well. We're going to hit the first repayment target this year of 25% of the loan repayments, and that's estimated at 7.5 billion. In the original repayment schedule, that was estimated at 8.1 billion. Is that correct?
Yes, because back in July 2010, we estimated that we would buy the loans for 40 billion, so 25% would have been 10 billion at that time. But we ended up paying less because the discount was more.
And did you then change the repayment schedule as a result in terms of the percentages you wanted?
No, the percentages was set by the board by reference to what value we required the portfolio for.
Okay. And so the thinking then is, in the original schedule was 40% in 2015, and today you talked about 50% by 2016. Mm-hmm. Is that a revision, though, on the original schedule for repayment?
No.
50% by 2016, I mean.
Well, the board looks at this each year, reviews the strategic plan in the light of market conditions, and looks at what can be realistically achieved in the time frame. And of course, if you look back in 2010, everybody was predicting by 2012 and 2013, based on official figures from the Central Bank and Department of Finance, that you'd have the economy growing maybe at 2.5–3% by this time, and that hasn't happened. So the board has to take account of market conditions. Yeah.
Your own projections as well for about 2% growth in the economy, as recently as last year. Is that correct?
Yeah. Over time, we just go with the official forecasts, and we sort of adopt the strategic plan in the context of what the economy is doing. I mean, this time last year, I wouldn't have been very confident in terms of, the Irish market in terms of how quickly it could recover. But we've seen, have you seen the amount of transactions that's happened in the first 8 months of this year, and the build-up on 2012, even over 2011, that has certainly been very welcome in terms of activity and interest in the Irish market as the Irish recovery story occurs, and in fairness to the job that has been done by everybody, including the government, in terms of sticking to this fiscal targets.
So you're more confident now than you were, say, this time last year?
Yes.
Even though our growth projections aren't as optimistic as previously?
No, but I think the big issue here is, I suppose, the two main banks had deleveraging targets to meet, and until they met those deleveraging targets, the reality is that they were going to be constrained in lending. I mean, that's just the reality. They both met their deleveraging targets. Bank of Ireland met it earlier this year, and AIB, it was announced, I think, earlier this week, that it met their deleveraging targets. So, as you go forward, you would actually see that they would probably be more active lenders into the market. And also, I suppose, the big difference between early last year and now is that you have more international players who are prepared to bring money, either real money or lend in. International banks are prepared to lend into the Irish market to fund people to buy property, and that is something that wasn't there early last year.
So you'd be confident of that repayment schedule then, even if we don't grow on average at 2% per year?
If it stays, I mean, it'd be better. I mean, obviously, if the economy does grow, but based on what is happening at the moment and the continued interest in the Irish property market. But as I said, the market isn't homogenous. So, we are fortunate in terms of the NAMA portfolio that 93% of our portfolio is in Dublin, Cork, Limerick and Galway. 67% of that portfolio, of the 93, is in Dublin. 10% is in the commuter belt, 10% is in Cork, 4% is in Galway, and 2% is in Limerick. So they're the major cities where our assets are. We have only 7% of our assets in Ireland outside of that, which is about 850 million. So in the context, that 850 million in the context of our current loan book is quite small, and if that takes much longer to recover, it's not the thing that's going to hold back NAMA in terms of meeting its potential. We've been very fortunate, unlike other asset management companies in other countries, that we had at the very start about 44% of our portfolio at the very start outside of Ireland, because it's allowed us to generate a lot of activity to give us a chance to hold back in the Irish market, to let that market recover.
I do want to come back to the detail actually of the portfolio, but just, I mean, we're looking at a 50% repayment by 2016,
Yeah.
and then 80% by 2017.
80% by, I think it's 2018, Chairman, or Deputy.
So on the schedule I have, it's 2017.
Yeah, but
95%.
I mean, that was based on a business plan the board published a long time ago. But the board looks at its business plan every year.
Okay.
So as I said in my speech, we're very confident that the contingent liability of the state started out as being 30 billion. That was the government guarantee debt. We'll have 15 billion paid off by 2016, and we'll have the full 30 billion paid off by 2020.
It's just, I mean, even if it is 80% by 2019, it's just a little bit of a leap then, in terms of, I mean, it's a lot to achieve in 2 years.
Oh, it is, but I suppose
30% in 2 years versus 50 in 6.
Yes, but I suppose the reality is that, you know, the economy has been through a very tough years since, as you can say, 2009 onwards. You know, we are beginning to see activity in the Irish market, and if growth does, you know, come back at a reasonable level, we would be quite confident that we can achieve that.
But I mean, if we look at the first 25%, which I do want to get to in a minute in the detail, a bulk of that has come from overseas. But when we're talking about that 30% in 2 years, we'll be looking at the Irish market almost exclusively.
Yes, but I suppose, as I said, Deputy, we're very fortunate in terms of where our assets are located in Ireland. They're in the urban locations, and the fact that 67% of them are in Dublin and 10% of them in the commuter belt would mean that you'd be more confident, given where the activity is in the Irish market and the population, that they're the better places to have them.
It's still a huge disposal of Ireland.
Oh, absolutely.
Even in a 2-year period, and that has its own impact upon the market.
Listen, I'd be the first to agree with you on that, Deputy, but the reality is that's the portfolio we have. You know, I'm much happier to say to you today that 93% of our portfolio is urban located, rather than 50% of our portfolio being urban located, because that would be a much more difficult prospect to achieve if the portfolio was constituted that way.
When the board creates these management plans, when it revises repayment schedules, does it need approval from the minister, or can it do that under its own auspices?
No. Under Section 18 of the NAM Act, the board is responsible for setting its strategy, and clearly the chairman and myself will keep the minister fully informed in terms of what the board's taking is.
But must he approve that strategy, or is that? No, he mustn't.
No.
Okay. So if we turn this then to the 7.5 billion figure for the end of this year, which would be the 25%, can you give me a breakdown of that in terms of commercial versus residential?
In terms of the majority of it would actually be commercial.
Commercial.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the overseas market versus the Irish market?
Yeah, over 80%. I think if I give you the figures of the 9.5 billion that we've sold to date, I think over 80. Sorry. So, about 80% of it has been in the overseas. 85% of it in the overseas market.
85% in the overseas market.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you were here, I think a year ago, we were talking about the change in the portfolio in terms of estimated valuation. We were talking about the overseas market being up 10% and the Irish market being down 20%. So, I mean, is that still your estimate in relation to the Irish market, 20% down?
Yeah, I mean, the market is what the market is. I mean, we have looked at what activity we've disposed to date in terms of where the market is, and the reality is that on a blended basis, between the Irish market being down 25% from the time we bought them, and we have some very big successes in the overseas markets, particularly London, we would be ahead on a blended basis by about 11%.
We'd be ahead on a blended basis. That's taking into account what the decrease in the Irish market and the.
Because effectively we've sold in terms of the Irish market, I think we've only sold 1.2 billion of assets. So if you even had the 25.
Are you talking in terms of sales?
Sales.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Because that's different to the actual what we think the estimated value on the books is, which is probably a bit more important looking longer term.
Yes.
Because, I mean, we've realised that the bulk of that 25% of the first bond repayment through UK sales, and that's what UK up on what we valued them at when we first took over the loans. Is that correct? At about 10%?
In terms
Or
of
the overseas?
yes.
Bulk of the sales, the bulk of that 25% has come from the overseas market.
Yes, yes,
But the
and,
overseas market up 10%.
but also we've had, I mean, an important constituent of the over 13.5 billion of income we've generated to date is that 4.5 billion of that has come from rental income that is coming on the portfolio. So while you've had 9 billion of sales, the bulk of those sales have been in overseas markets and in London in particular.
But with the Irish portion then still down 20% on what was paid in November 2009, when we look ahead to the next repayment target, with the bulk of the first 25% coming from overseas, and that was up. We look at the next 25%, we can't dip into the overseas to achieve that, and the Irish market is down.
Yeah, but the reality is, Deputy, is that as at the 30th of June of this year, we still have 9 billion of overseas assets still remaining in the NAMA portfolio. And we have about 12 billion of assets remaining in Ireland. And we have taken substantial impairments. I mean, the impairment figure to the 31st of December, which is 3.3 billion, the majority of that 3.3 billion impairment that the board has recognised today, and which has been signed off by the CNAG, has been appropriate, has been against the Irish assets.
Impairments against the Irish assets?
Yes. Yeah.
But those impairments increase each year?
Yes. Well, the impairment exercise is a is as much as a mathematical exercise as anything, because you put all your cash flows in and you discount them back at a thing under, and I want to get technical about it, under IFRS called effective interest rate, and the effective interest rate in the NAMA portfolio is about an average about 5%. So you're accruing income and then you're discounting them back. But you're accruing income on assets which are not income generating, like land as well, at 5% of discounted back. So depending on when you're going to put it in for sale, and it's a purely mathematical exercise, you're going to put it for sale in 2013 or sale in 2016, that would have an effect in terms of what your impairment figure is going to be versus your discounted value versus your carrying value, and that's how you calculate your impairments.
So when you look forward then to 2015 and the next repayment, and we're going to achieve a further 15% by then, and we're looking at overseas at 9 billion and Ireland at 12 billion. I mean, are you planning again to achieve that 15% and releasing the majority of overseas as in the first 25%?
No, we would see, now we're beginning to see much more interest in the Irish market. If you think about it, in 2009, there was only 97 million worth of activity in the Irish market, the Irish property market. In 2010, I think it was about 200 million. 2011, I think it was something similar. For 2012, it was about 550 million. And already this year, the Irish commercial property market is over $1 billion. So I'm very, as I said in my speech, we will sell into the market on the basis of what the market can absorb. If you're going to put more onto the market than the market has absorbed, then effectively you're going to give away your portfolio for nothing. And that's not what NAMA's objective, is commercial remit or statutory remit is. It is effectively to have, an orderly and phased disposal of the assets and to sell them at prices which are realistic and which captures their intrinsic value.
It comes back to what I was trying to get at earlier. To get the 50% figure by 2016, you'll be getting rid of most of overseas assets.
Well, the board has a very deliberate strategy since it started off in its first strategic plan in 2010, as saying, listen, we will sell the overseas markets because those markets are very buoyant to a lot of buyers. So if you look at where NAMA's overseas assets remain, about 7 billion of the 9 billion overseas assets is in the UK, primarily in London and the South East, and about 2 billion of the overseas assets is in 3 other locations by value Germany, France, and the US. So again, there are places where there is liquidity and where there is activity, so you can actually get those assets sold. And it's been very deliberate on the part of board and NAMA strategy to say, listen, we will sell the overseas assets and we will asset manage the Irish assets and take the income on the Irish assets and then sell them at the appropriate time. So if you think about it in terms of this, and this is really just common sense, if you've got income producing Irish assets which are giving you an income of 8 to 9% per annum, and now and that was up until the start of this year, and now those assets are the yield is contracted, which means the price of the asset itself has risen, then that yield is coming down to more towards 7%. Then you're better off to take the income and then wait for the yields to contract and then sell them at a realistic level. That's what it's about.
And I think the other point, Deputy, if I may, in relation to where will the next 25% come from, because of the overseas assets, it's not just the fact we have sold so much of those, but we have got a very, very good return from those sales, which in turn is enabling us actually to invest in our Irish assets, so that by the time we put them on the market, they will actually be much more valuable. So that's where the blend will come from in the next 25%. It's the market itself improving. It is obviously the investor interest is increasing, but it is also the wherewithal we have coming largely from the UK to invest in our Irish assets. So by the time they do come for sale, they will be much more valuable. And all of that will contribute to the 25%. And as the CEO has mentioned, the actual location of our assets in Ireland is very important.
I understand the next 25%, but it's more I'm thinking beyond that, to the 30% then over the 2-year period. Because if we've achieved 50% of our bond repayments on NAMA through the bulk being overseas sales, and that at an increase above the value at which we purchased them, which is good, we're then relying on almost wholly in the Irish market over a 2-year period to realise 30% of NAMA bonds. And I understand the point on rental income, but do we really think that the income being generated off those assets will be sufficient over a 2-year period, combined with the recovery in those asset prices in that period as well? Because we're talking about a significant jump. Despite what investment might be made.
You're also talking about the investment that we make between now and 2016 or wherever, which certainly will give us a yield beyond that. But I mean, in saying today that we are confident that we will repay all our senior debt by 2020, we have done that on the basis of a very, very detailed look at projections right out to 2020 in respect of every one of our NAMA managed debtors. So it's not it's not a theoretical exercise or anything like that. It's a very hard look at cash flows, at sales projections, at the timing of those right out to 2020.
In relation to that then, in relation to your debtors and what's been achieved to date, I mean, has that been achieved solely through debtors who are working with NAMA?
No. In fact, of the 9 billion of assets that we've sold to date, I think 1.2 billion of that has actually come from assets where we had appointed receivers, or there were receivers already appointed by the time we inherited the portfolio from the bank. So, but the majority of it has come from debtors who are working with us.
Because I think you said previously that only 2/3 of debtors are working with the
agency. Yeah. I mean, by value, it's well over 70%. By number, it's probably now down to about 55%. But the reality is that in terms of the way we manage the portfolio, NAMA has 800 debtors. The top 190 are managed directly by NAMA, and then the other 600 are managed by the participating institutions. If you assume the IBRC was still in place, so. A lot of those smaller debtors we're now finding, because they effectively got involved in speculative buying of land. They weren't really developers. A lot of them now are just consenting to receivership. They no longer want to deal with the assets because obviously the land is never going to be developed and things like that. So you'll find it a lot in the smaller size debtors. That's why there's been a decline in number. But if you look by value, over 70% by value are working consensually with NAMA, which are mainly the NAMA managed ones.
But if the bulk of the assets which we've disposed of already are assets that belong to people who are working with the agency,
Yeah.
then it means that the loans that are left or that people deal with are going to be more difficult to deal with. It's going to be a harder task for the agency because these people aren't willing to comply or to work with you.
But the reality here, Deputy, is that NAMA is a diverse portfolio. There's over 12,000 loans. There's about 55,000 individual property saleable units in the portfolio. That's what we inherited. So over time, what we're doing is that we're looking down through those 55,000 units and we're trying to identify which ones are better to sell now if the opportunities sell as part of the whole business plan process, and then which ones are better to asset management. Maybe there's an opportunity to put some capital in to build on a site that has planning permission and sell the complete product. So, like, this is a complex business, and we're not just looking at debtor A and saying we'll just continue to work with debtor A to the end. Like, we've 800 debtors to look at every single day to try and figure out how we are going to meet our cash flow targets each year to generate the cash. Which the Troika, like, I appear before the Troika every quarter. So with the Troika, every time I appear before the Troika is just saying, we want you to repay those NAMA bonds as quickly as possible. We want you to sell down the portfolio as quickly as possible. And we have to say to them, as we say to you, this has to be done in an orderly and phased way to realise the maximum value on the portfolio so that the taxpayer is not faced with another hole in terms of, if we don't generate enough cash to get rid of the contingent liability of the state, the government has guaranteed the NAMA bonds and the government will have to pay up the difference. So our job is to make sure that that contingent liability does realise. And as the chairman said, and I said in my own speech today, we rigorously look at all the cash flows, what the values of the assets are, what the market segments are at the point in time, and it's not static. Things change from month to month, but overall, we've sort of said we're very confident. Sitting here today, by 2020, we realise enough cash to pay off the senior debt on the portfolio. And clearly, Deputy, you are right. There will be a rump of assets, I expect, left at the end of NAMA's work in 2020, which may not have sold at that date, but we think that we'll have generated enough rental income on the assets that we have at present that will make up for the difference for that rump of assets that's left. And that rump of assets that I would expect may be left, and I could be wrong, but I would just be honest with you, is potentially that 900 million worth of assets, which is outside the major urban centres in Ireland. And that's not a big problem.
So, thank you, because this is the next point I wanted to come to. When we look then to 2020, what you're anticipating is that you'll still have loans or assets in NAMA, but the actual bonds will have all been repaid.
Yeah. Expected of a generation of cash, and we wouldn't be surprised if there was a small rump of assets left, which NAMA doesn't have to continue to exist. If it was only land, the government have other mechanisms to be able to give it to local authorities or to the OPW or whatever the case is to do it. But our objective is to sell down everything. But NAMA is a complex infrastructure. You won't need a complex infrastructure forever, I think, as the Minister said last week.
Yeah. And then, sorry, you said 9 million, did you, in terms of the assets outside of the commuter belts?
And 900 million.
So, because again, this was what was discussed last year when it came before us, you're expecting then effectively an operating profit of 1 billion after 2020?
An operating profit?
Of about just under 1 billion.
Yeah, that was the board in its business plan in 2010 said that under three scenarios, depending on whether its central scenario was that it expected close to $1 billion profit, but that was assuming, as you said there, Deputy, earlier on, that you had reasonable growth in 2011, 12 and 13. What the board is saying now, and what we're saying now, is that we would expect that it would be probably closer to break even.
Break even?
Yeah. Because if you repay all your senior debt, that's the contingent liability to the state. The thing that remains then is the sub-debt that NAMA issued to the banks, which is about 1.5 billion, and it depends what assets is left that can be used then to meet
to balance that 900 million off the 1.5
yeah.
Okay, so that's a change then based on the you expected better growth figures for the last 3 years. They didn't come.
Yes, they didn't come.
So that's one of the revisions that you made.
They didn't come, but you know, from this time, from this, if I was here this time, I think I was here this time last year. You know, I mean, we're much more confident as a year now ahead than we were than we were this time last year, because there's so much more activity in the market. So you know, that's something to be welcomed.
I just something that I've been a little bit confused on is the concept of long-term economic value. When we purchased the loans, we purchased them on the date of 30th of November 2009, was when we were purchasing them at the market value at the time.
Yeah. Well, effectively, Deputy, long-term economic value is a bit. It was a European concept that was part of things. The reality is that, and you would see this in the report, and the very good report that was produced by the Controller and Auditor General in terms of the acquisition. And the key point that's actually within that report, and you know, we're aware of it, maybe not everybody else is aware of, is that while the banks got long-term, was supposed to got long-term economic value, the value that we paid the banks for the loans was actually equal to the current market value of the properties in 2009. Because what actually happened was that you got the value of the property in 2009, you added this long-term economic value based on this European formula, but then you put those into a cash flow model and you discounted them back. So by discounting them back over a number of years, you actually eliminated the long-term economic value. So if you actually look at the CNAG's report, and it's also detailed, I think, in our 2011 annual report, we actually did a paragraph explaining it. It actually means that the value the banks got was actually equal to the current market value of the properties as of 30 November 2009.
So we acquired loans at the time that were seen to be worth about 31 billion.
Yes, and the property was worth 31 billion.
Right.
Yeah.
And then over the course of a 10-year period, we've managed those assets to basically realise the market value as of 2009.
Yeah, yeah, to get to 31 billion back. Yeah.
Okay. And then anything above that you qualify as profit.
Yeah.
And that's
Well, after taking account of obviously your interest costs that you pay on the bonds we issue to the bank and any other costs we incur.
And taking into account operating costs, fees to debtors, any investments made and money recouped off.
Oh, absolutely. So I mean, that's what everything has to go into the cash flow.
So you have to make more than 31 billion then to achieve a break-even target.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you're estimating that roughly at about 32 billion.
No, I think over time, I don't do the figures there. Yeah. In our latest cash flows that we've done here, we're sort of estimating by 2020, we'll have collected about just over 39 billion. We'll pay off the 30.1 billion of the senior bonds. We'll have paid interest on our debt of about 3.5 billion, and we'll have invested a sum of about 4.3, is it? Yeah. 3 billion at that stage, yeah.
And that's what you're estimating for 2019, was that what you said?
Well, by 2020, so we do the cash flows all the way out to the end of the life of NAMA, that's the board does, yeah.
Okay. Just thank you, Charles. I'll conclude on this, but it's just a question of in relation to the aims of NAMA, and you said in your opening statement that NAMA was established to achieve the best financial return for the state from the assets entrusted to it. But the legislation doesn't exactly say that. The legislation is open to interpretation on that point as to what exactly NAMA, what it is meant to pursue above and beyond the value of the assets as it acquired them in 2009. I mean, looking back to what Brian Lenihan said, he said the amount of the borrower owes will not change because of the transfer of the loan from the bank to NAMA. Yet today, and we've heard it before previously when you were before as the PAC, that view has changed in NAMA, that you're looking to realise those assets as you can over the 10-year periods. And that will be it. As you said before, when a debtor, and I ask it because it's going to become more important as debtors start to work out Irish property here in the market. A debtor who will work with NAMA, make the repayments, and recover the cost of the asset as it was bought by NAMA in 2009, after a period of 2 years, will be then let off. So that statement that was made by Brian Lenihan when this legislation was enacted originally, it's no longer. Yeah. We've seen a bit of a creep there.
No, not like, listen. The reality is we bought 74 billion worth of loans from the banks. We paid 32 billion to the banks for those loans. I'd love to be able to say to you that the value of the underlying assets was 74 billion, but it's not. They were 32 billion when we bought them. So, you know, what we're trying to realise is get that money back, the 30 to 32 billion back. We are pursuing the debtor, each and every debtor, for the maximum amount of money that he can repay, either through selling underlying assets or going after him for unencumbered assets or reversing asset transfers. So in my speech there today, I said to date, we have taken 800 million off debtors that they had as unencumbered assets are transferred to third parties and forced them to give back to us. We've done asset searches on people. We ask them for sworn statement of affairs. We do asset searches on them to make sure that their statement of affairs is correct. So, Deputy, I assure you, if a debtor has more assets than he has declared to us, and you would see it in, and I don't talk about any specific court case, but you would see it is that NAMA is in the courts quite often pursuing people where we believe that they have may have other assets that they actually haven't.
And that's not the point I'm making. I'm not referring to a specific court case. What I'm referring to is a debtor who's working with the agency, doing its best to help you realise the value of the loan as you purchased it in 2009 and whatever you can get for that today. That once they've done that, and they might even do it and they'll do it with the salary, fair enough, if they're the best person to manage the portfolio. And they might also do it with a profit if they bring back more, a profit to them, if they bring back more for the agency than what you paid in 2009. And then after a 2-year period, they're off the hook.
Yeah, but we have to, like, the reality is, Deputy, we actually have to take, and the board and NAMA has to make a commercial view of how best we're going to maximise the return in this portfolio. And, you know, you could take a view that you get rid of every single debtor and, you know, find a slew of receivers and to get them to manage the assets. But we don't believe that's the best way to work. So sometimes we actually have to, you know, cough hard and say, listen, the best thing I got to do is work with the person on a consensual basis and help them to realise the maximum value of the assets, make sure that they've given up all their personal assets that they have, and that, you know, in return for working with us over a period of time, we may then enter into a commercial deal with them and say, listen, you know, you will, you know, once all the assets are sold and you've not left, you know, the difference is written off. But the reality is that that is, you know, not inconsistent with the personal insolvency legislation, where somebody can go in and declare bankruptcy, and a number of our debtors have, and effectively then all you're left with then is the actual charge over the assets, and there's no further recourse back to an individual. And of course, there's also debtors in our portfolio who have borrowed through special purpose vehicles, who have no personal recourse. So all your recourse you have is to the asset anyway.
It's not entirely consistent, but also the personal insolvency bill and the NAMA scheme aren't necessarily comparative either. I mean, as I would see it, and I take the point I think you're trying to make.
But I think in terms of you know, the insolvency regime here in Ireland was saying that, you know, if somebody's made bankrupt, they're bankrupt for 12 years. The legislature here and the government have promulgated legislation that are bringing that down to 3 years. So, I mean, the option is always there for people who have completely overborrowed to actually seek bankruptcy, either in Ireland or a lot of the major debtors, as you would have seen as in the newspapers, actually just go and live in the UK or elsewhere and go for bankruptcy in those regimes. And in some of those regimes, you can be out of bankruptcy after 1 year.
Mm-hmm. But the debtors who work with NAMA, it's taking them a 3 to 5 year process to actually work through, in your estimation.
Yes.
Working their loan book after 2 years, and then
but like,
they're not bankrupt at the end.
No, but I mean, what we look at is what they would have left at the end of it, and the reality is that they'd have very little left at the end of it. But a lot of these people, you know, got caught up on this thing. They borrowed a huge amount of money. They accept they made a huge error around that they got caught in an asset bubble. They overborrowed and they overpaid for assets. And they basically want to find a resolution to it, because a lot of these people as well would have families and children who are living, and let's say, listen, this is part of their contribution towards the recovery of the Irish economy, that they get the most back for NAMA. So, you know, but it has to be a commercial arrangement. We're in the commercial business. You know, this isn't a business where we actually have a huge amount of empathy for people, to be honest with you. But we have to look at it purely on a commercial basis and saying what's going to generate the best return for the taxpayer to get rid of this contingent liability that hangs over the taxpayer at present.
Thank you. I'll finish there, but I'd like to come back in later if I may.